Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and as we reach the end of 2024, I can't believe I'm saying that already, so be quick, I want to talk about some of my favorite things that I read this year. I will say that 2024 was not an amazing year for reading. I am going to hit my reading goal, which is I usually try to read about 100 books a year, and I'm almost there. But I didn't read a lot this year that I absolutely loved, and that's something that I would really like to change in 2025. I really like it when I'm spoiled for choice when I'm talking my favorite reads of the year, and this year I feel like I just went and picked out the only things I gave 5 stars to. That said, I did read some real bangers, and so I'm going to talk about what they were, and they're not really in order, just things that I really, really liked in 2024. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the board game book that I like the best this year, because it's a board game channel, so I'll lure everyone in with our common ground. But my favorite game-related book that I read this year was The Game Changers by Tim Clare. And I interviewed him for my podcast. I read an advanced copy of the book in preparation to interview him. It's still only available in the UK. It's going to come to the United States next year as, I think, across the board. But this book was so smart and interesting and fun. It was like a whole bunch of very curious deep dives into gaming and different gaming cultures. I learned about games I'd never heard of, like historical trick takers and games from Japan. And I really I've never played like traditional Mancala, and now I really want to because I was really fascinated by the discussions of it in the book. So Tim Clare is just a really curious person, and he really loves games, and you can feel it when you talk to him, you can feel it when you read the book. And I was just so inspired, I think, by his pure love for our hobby, and also by so many of the people in different games that he wrote about. So if you want just a really interesting kind of broad coverage book about games, I would say Game Changers is probably the best book of that type that I've ever read. And so it's an easy 5 stars because I still think about it and I just purely enjoyed it. The next book I want to talk about is Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner. This was on the Booker Prize shortlist. I've read most of those books. I still have a couple left to go, but this one I really enjoyed. Creation Lake is kind of a dark novel about a woman who is essentially an undercover agent. She's no longer working for a government. She works for some kind of private agency, but she's trying to infiltrate like a French leftist movement and get them to do something bad so that they can come in and arrest people and like bring the movement down. And I was really fascinated by it because her personality is so messed up, and like the way that she sees herself, she uses other people. It's just, I feel like in some ways it's maybe a more real look at what it would be like to be the sort of person who, infiltrates and makes fake friends. And, we normally see spies, I think, as a bit more romantic. And this was a look at how empty it might make you inside to constantly be getting ready to betray people that you're supposed to be friends with. Meanwhile, she's also having an existential crisis because she's reading the works of an intellectual who mentors the movement. And there's something about her attachment to this guy that was oddly touching. I feel like finding kinship in other people, there's something very charming about that, even if it's through, reading emails that you weren't supposed to see because they were in somebody else's inbox. The next book on my list I'm going to mention is Black Easter by James Blish. I never expected to read this at all, but because I played Aleph Null this year, it's a board game about summoning the devil, I was so weirdly charmed by the game and by its like sort of pretenses of being, going through a grimoire and like doing a magical ritual, that I wanted to look up the book it was based on, and that's Black Easter. So Black Easter is essentially like a fantasy novel about an arms dealer who commissions a black magician to unleash all the devils of hell on Earth for a night. And sort of like the escalation of, is this magic real? Holy crap, it is. What are the practices associated with it? What are the attitudes associated with it? It was just super interesting to watch all this play out in the novel. I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I have not devoured a book like that in a long time. And so is the book flawed? Yeah, in some ways it is. It didn't necessarily age well. It's a little bit misogynistic. There are parts of it that are kind of goofy. But it was a fantastic read, and if you can stomach books about the devil and summoning Satan, then I think you'll really enjoy this one. I certainly did. Kind of second spot on my list is just the whole Broken Earth trilogy, which I finally reread. So the Broken Earth trilogy is a fantasy trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, and the first book in is the 5th season. And there's a lot going on, but basically you should know that there are people who have like stone manipulation magic and they can feel like the earth. And these people have been both vilified and cruelly used for a long time. And when some things change that rupture the world, everything is thrown into chaos and everybody has to figure out what to do next. And honestly, it is maybe the best fantasy trilogy I have ever read. It is so good. Like, it has all these interesting issues of your identity and motherhood and friendship and what it means to be found family, including with some like fairly disturbing creatures that may or may not be your friend. About the breakup of society, about the cruel use of other people's bodies for allegedly the good of the whole. There's just so much going on, and a lot of it is really upsetting. A lot of it's really touching, but it's just really, I think, peak what fantasy could be as a mixture of interesting story, interesting world building, and also social commentary. So if you have not read the Broken Earth trilogy, you really should. I think it's like life-changingly good. And then at the top of my list, I finally read what many consider to be the perfect novel, and maybe they're right. It's fantastic. I read Stoner by John Williams. And so Stoner is a book about an English professor who was supposed to be a farmer. He falls in love with literature and he devotes his life to learning, writing about, and teaching literature. And he, kind of fits in the academy, but kind of not. People don't necessarily see him as like the most impressive scholar or professor, but he persists. And the book is like a quiet book about his relationships, some of which are quite dysfunctional, his role in his department, which is maybe not as prominent as he would have wanted. And yet, it's just a really moving book that I think asks, like, what is it to live meaningfully? And what is it to make something of yourself? The book can be very depressing, but I also thought it ended in a strangely hopeful way as well. And the writing is just pristine. Like, if you like understated writing where not a word is wasted, everything is very tight, and yet everything is also very evocative, I really think John Williams nailed it with Stoner. I was super impressed with just how much he could say with how few words. And I was also impressed with how he could make a seemingly small story feel so big. I was really moved by Stoner, and I don't know that I've read a book that haunted me like this one in a long time. So if you want to really go for it, maybe if you're feeling sad or depressed, I would not necessarily jump into Stoner. But if you're at least in a neutral mood and you want to read a piece of literature that's going to make you feel a lot of things, then I highly recommend Stoner by John Williams. It's definitely on my list of best written novels I've ever read and most affecting novels that I've ever read. I really was amazed by it. So those are the 5 best things I read in 2024, and let's see what 2025 brings. I would love it if you dropped some of the best things that you read in the comments below. And thanks so much for watching, everybody. Happy gaming. Of course, it's a gaming channel, but also happy reading.